usually, when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of precision, you know?
Right, like a clear answer.
Exactly. Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line. The doctor points to it, and, well, the problem is undeniable. It's visible, it's categorized, it's isolated.
Yeah, it's right there in black and white.
Right. But when you step into the world of diagnosing the health of an entire civilization, that x-ray machine just completely shatters.
Oh, for sure. The landscape is just murky and chaotic.
Totally chaotic and completely subjective. You have
Yeah.
like a million different voices pointing at different shadows on the film, all claiming to know the exact root cause of our societal fracture.
And diagnosing a civilization in real time is, it's incredibly difficult. Because the symptoms, like economic instability or shifting gender roles, institutional distrust, they're all deeply intertwined. It feels less like reading an x-ray and more like trying to decipher a hurricane while you're literally standing in the middle of it.
Yeah, and that hurricane is exactly what we are walking into today. So, welcome to the Deep Dive, where we are exploring a highly controversial, fiercely unapologetic new ebook that claims to have, essentially, cracked the code on modern Western society.
It definitely makes some bold claims.
It really does. The author looks at those murky cultural waters and claims to see a very clear, highly intentional blueprint. But before we dive into the mechanics of this, I do want to ask you to please like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening right now.
Yes, definitely hit that subscribe button.
And I need to say this right up front. If you are fascinated by the history of our institutions before they were, according to this author, captured by feminists and Marxists, you need to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the book we are reviewing today.
It's definitely a must-read if this topic interests you.
Yeah, it's called Red Pill Gospel, Reclaiming Society from Cultural Marxism by Conrad Riker. And you should also follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Because it's definitely a text that requires a direct reading to grasp the full architecture of its claims. Like, Riker is speaking to a very specific audience here.
Right, primarily men's rights activists
Yeah.
and, individuals within red-pilled manosphere communities.
Exactly. He explicitly calls this book a war manual for navigating modern institutions.
And because of that target audience, and honestly just the explosive nature of the text itself, we have to issue a crucial impartiality disclaimer.
Yes, very important.
This book contains highly politically charged content. It touches on race, gender, sexuality, the culture wars, all of it. And we, as your hosts, are not taking sides.
Right. We are not endorsing Conrad Riker's viewpoints, and we aren't condemning them either.
Exactly. So if you hear something today that makes your blood boil, or maybe something you completely agree with, remember, our mission today is strictly to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the mechanics of these provocative ideas.
We're basically treating this ebook as a cultural artifact because it is resonating with a massive demographic right now.
So what's our roadmap for this deep dive?
Well, our goal is to really map out Riker's architecture. We'll explore his definitions of cultural Marxism, how he views the modern legal and medical systems, the psychological impact of the digital age on men, his macro view on globalism, and finally, his blueprint for what he actually calls a red pill renaissance.
Okay, let's start with his foundational premise right off the bat. Riker opens the book by claiming that society isn't just drifting off course accidentally. He argues we are being systematically lied to by design.
Right, and he uses this incredibly visceral anecdote to anchor that idea.
The Swedish mother.
Yeah, in 2015, this mother in Sweden was fined 10,000 kroner by social services.
And her offense is just wild.
It's crazy. She knitted pink booties for her newborn daughter. That was the offense.
Unbelievable. Just for gendering her child with pink yarn.
Exactly. And Riker uses that specific, almost surreal story to establish his baseline of what he terms cultural Marxism. For him, cultural Marxism isn't just some vague academic buzzword.
Right, he defines it as a deliberate, systematic war on biological reality.
Yes. He argues that finding a mother for pink booties is the logical, totalitarian endpoint of an ideology that actively seeks to sever the natural biological bond between a parent and child.
So they can replace it with state authority.
Exactly.
Now, he makes a massive historical leap here that I think we really need to unpack. Because he compares this modern push for gender inclusivity and the breakdown of the nuclear family directly to the Soviet Union in the 1920s.
Yeah, he leans heavily into the history of Alexandra Kollontai.
Who was she, for our listeners who might not know?
She was Vladimir Lenin's commissar for social welfare and a very radical feminist at the time. Riker details how Kollontai viewed the traditional nuclear family as a bourgeois relic.
Like an oppressive capitalist structure?
Exactly. So the early Soviet state, under her influence, actively tried to dismantle the family unit. They introduced these things called collective creches.
Right, these massive state-run facilities.
Yes, where children were raised communally by government workers rather than their actual biological parents.
The idea being that if the state raises the child's primary loyalty is to the state, not to the mother or father.
Exactly. But Riker connects this failed 1920s Soviet experiment to modern Western culture by pointing to the psychological fallout.
Because it was a disaster.
An absolute disaster. He notes that by 1950, Soviet psychologists were documenting an epidemic of attachment disorders. They basically created an entire generation of emotionally stunted adults.
Wow.
And Riker argues that you simply cannot overwrite the evolutionary biological need for a mother's specific nurturing and a father's specific boundaries with just bureaucratic state care.
So his core thesis is that modern Western society is like unknowingly installing that exact same corrupted software update.
Yes, the software analogy fits perfectly.
Yeah.
He believes we are running a social operating system that crashed spectacularly a century ago, but it's being repackaged today under the vocabulary of progress and equity.
That analogy is super interesting. But, if this ideology fails so terribly, how did it supposedly infiltrate Western institutions so successfully? Because he brings up this psychological framework, the authoritarian personality thesis.
Right, which was a highly influential psychological theory developed by Theodor Adorno and the Frankfurt School after World War II.
Right. And traditionally, it's taught as a way to understand and map the personality traits that make populations susceptible to fascism.
Yeah. But Riker flips the traditional academic understanding of Adorno completely upside down. He looks at the funding mechanism.
This part blew my mind.
Right. He claims that Adorno's work, which became the absolute bedrock of modern sociology and psychology in Western universities, was actually funded and promoted by the exact same CIA intelligence networks that were running the MKUltra mind control experiments.
Okay, wait. I need to push back on that, or at least clarify. Is he seriously arguing that the CIA, an American intelligence agency during the Cold War, was intentionally funding Marxist sociology to undermine American families?
That is precisely his argument.
Yeah.
Yeah. Riker theorizes that the intelligence community wanted a population of atomized, predictable, and compliant consumers. And to get that, you have to break down organic rival authorities.
Meaning the traditional family.
The family, local community bonds, and deep-seated patriotism. He argues that the true purpose of the authoritarian personality thesis was to medically pathologize tradition itself.
So it allowed academics to label, like a strong father figure or a protective instinct, as a dangerous, proto-fascist psychological condition.
Exactly. Riker wants the reader to realize that the very vocabulary used today to describe masculinity as toxic was engineered decades ago to destabilize familial loyalty.
That is just, it's a massive claim.
Yeah.
But it transitioned logically in his book. Because if the foundational goal of this ideology is to dismantle the nuclear family, you can't just pass a law making marriage illegal.
No, you have to operationalize it.
Right. And Riker argues the most effective way to dismantle the family is to make it financially ruinous through the legal system. He aggressively targets family courts, calling them the divorce industrial complex or the marriage plantation.
He uses highly emotive language there. He refers to men paying alimony as alimony slaves.
Yeah, he really doesn't hold back.
Not at all. He focuses on how the legal architecture of divorce shifted away from protecting the family unit to what he views as actively incentivizing its destruction.
And the case studies he highlights to prove this are incredibly visceral. Like, he talks about a Florida man in 2019 who didn't lose his home to a hurricane, but to a judge.
Oh, the guitar guy.
Yes. This man was ordered to liquidate his entire prize bass guitar collection, which included a rare 1976 Fender Precision, by the way, simply to fund his ex-wife's $1,200 a night spiritual awakening retreat in Bali.
Just wild.
And then he brings up Dave, the Texas oil engineer. Dave's been paying $4,300 every single month since 2007 to an ex-wife. And get this, she actually married her yoga teacher in 2010.
And there were no children involved in Dave's marriage. Right.
0. No kids. So Dave is legally mandated to subsidize another man's lifestyle just because he makes a higher salary.
Riker uses Dave to illustrate a concept he calls state-sanctioned plunder. But he doesn't just rely on these crazy anecdotes. He brings in statistical data to argue that this is a systemic feature, not just a bug.
What are the numbers he uses?
Well, he cites census data indicating that 70% of all divorces are initiated by women, Yet, despite being the initiating party in the vast majority of cases, 92% of custody battles end with the courts favoring the mothers.
Let's look closely at that number because 92% is a staggering disparity. But does Riker account for the nuance of out-of-court settlements? Because, many fathers don't actively fight for custody and they just agree to standard visitation. Is he blaming judicial bias for something that might just be mutual agreement?
He does address that, actually, but his interpretation is that men agree to these settlements because of what he calls learned legal helplessness.
Meaning they know they'll lose anyway.
Exactly. Riker argues that male lawyers advise their clients not to fight because the precedent is so overwhelmingly stacked against them, it would just bankrupt them in legal fees for the exact same result.
Wow.
And he traces the origin of this disparity back to California's 1969 no-fault divorce experiment, which was actually signed by then-Governor Ronald Reagan.
Right, because before no fault, you actually had to prove a breach of contract to get a divorce.
Right.
Like infidelity, abuse, abandonment.
Exactly. It operated like traditional contract law. But no fault allowed either party to dissolve the marriage for any reason or no reason at all without financial penalty to the dissolving party.
Which changed everything.
Completely. Riker points out that within a decade of this legal shift, male bankruptcies quadrupled. He says it essentially made marriage the only legally binding contract in Western society that one party can unilaterally break while forcing the other party to continue paying for it.
And he backs this up with a really fascinating 2022 Cornell University study. The researchers found that married men work 18% longer hours than single men, but they actually save 23% less wealth.
And Riker's interpretation of this data is just brutal.
Yeah, he concludes that society has basically turned married men into the government's ideal, compliant taxpayers. They're grinding away, working massive overtime, but retaining none of the capital, essentially stuck on what he calls the marriage farm.
And to explain the mechanism behind why women initiate 70% of divorces under the system, Riker introduces his beta bucks bailout theory.
The beta bucks bailout.
Yeah, he roots this deeply in evolutionary psychology, specifically the concept of hypergamy.
Which is the drive to constantly trade up, right?
Basically, yeah. Hypergamy is the hardwired evolutionary instinct observed across many species, including humans, for females to seek mates who offer upward social and financial mobility. Biologically, females invest heavily in reproduction, so they seek resources to ensure their offspring survive.
But in a state of nature, hypergamy carries massive risk, doesn't it?
Exactly. Leaving a provider means risking starvation. But Riker argues that modern family courts have taken this ancient biological instinct and completely removed the risk.
By guaranteeing alimony.
Right. By guaranteeing lifelong alimony and the equitable distribution of assets regardless of who broke the vows, the courts turbocharge hypergamy. Riker states that men are turned into ATMs with legs, literally underwriting their ex-wives' Tinder premium profiles as they search for a biological upgrade, all subsidized by the previous husband's labor.
That is such a vivid, intense image. And he points to the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial as, like, the ultimate pop culture exposure of this dynamic.
Oh, yeah, he spends some time on that.
Because when Amber Heard publicly pledged her $7 million divorce settlement to charity, the media lauded her as a hero. But when the defamation trial revealed she hadn't actually donated the money and was essentially using the legal system to extract wealth and destroy reputation, Riker notes that the establishment media still defended her and called Depp petty.
Right, and for Riker, this proves that the legal system operates as a protection racket for professional victims.
And we are seeing a profound behavioral shift in how men respond to this legal architecture, aren't we?
Absolutely. Riker documents the rise of MGTOW men going their own way.
MGTOW.
Yeah, it's a movement of men who decide that the risk-to-reward ratio of legal marriage is fundamentally broken, so they just opt out completely.
And the scale of that opt-out is wild. He mentions the hashtag marriage strike on TikTok, which has over 2.1 billion views.
Billion with a B.
Yeah. You have an entire generation of young men looking at Dave, the oil engineer, looking at the alimony stats, and deciding they will literally never sign a marriage license.
And for the men who are already navigating the system, Riker details how they are aggressively hiding assets.
Crypto stuff.
Yes. He talks about men funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into obscure Bitcoin wallets with names like limited edition Boba Fett helmet collection. Because family court judges usually don't understand blockchain cryptography, they can't subpoena or confiscate what they can't find on a traditional bank ledger.
That is just, it's a completely parallel financial evasion system.
Exactly. And this withdrawal from the legal system leads directly into Riker's next major argument. Because if the courts are policing men's wealth and social contracts, he asserts that the medical and educational establishments are policing their actual biology.
He calls this the anti-male medical complex.
Right.
And he starts this section in the elementary school classroom, arguing that the modern educational environment is inherently hostile to male development. He tells this story of Jim Watkins, a father in Texas.
Oh, the Ritalin story.
Yeah, Watkins' 8-year-old son was struggling in class. The school psychologist labeled the boy disruptive, unfocused, and immediately put him on Ritalin, which is an amphetamine.
Which is standard procedure now, unfortunately.
But Watkins decides to completely reject the diagnosis. He pulls his son off the medication, removes all processed chicken nuggets and seed oils from his diet, and just puts him to work outside.
And the result was pretty incredible.
Within 6 weeks, this supposedly disabled, hyperactive child is out in the yard splitting firewood and reciting passages of the Odyssey from memory.
Riker uses this to illustrate a profound mismatch between biology and environment. He argues the real disability wasn't in the boy's prefrontal cortex. The disability was the fluorescent lighting, the terrible processed food, and the unnatural demand to sit perfectly still for 8 hours a day.
It's like taking a high-performance sports car, say a Mustang, placing it inside a quiet, cramped library, and then punishing the car for revving its engine.
That's a great analogy.
Because the environment is completely wrong to the machinery. So instead of moving the car to a racetrack, the administration pours sugar in the gas tank to force it to stall.
That captures the mechanics of his argument perfectly. He actually labels this systemic medicating as chemical cuckolding. And to prove the scale of it, he cites a case study from Brookline Elementary in Massachusetts, where an astonishing 40% of all third-grade boys have an active ADHD diagnosis.
40%?
Yes, and he contrasts that medicalization with the school's physical environment. They offer the boys only 7 minutes of unstructured outdoor recess a day, but they mandate 45 minutes of sedentary mindful breathing exercises.
It's literally pathologizing natural boyish energy. And the downstream effects of this are incredibly dark. Because he cites a Department of Justice report claiming that 85% of inmates in juvenile detention facilities were already on psychiatric medications before their first arrest.
Yeah, that stat is chilling. Riker makes the point that his grandfather would get a stern talking to or a detention for acting out in class, but today's boys are given Schedule II narcotics.
And this chemical management doesn't end at graduation, right?
No, it follows men into adulthood. Riker argues it shifts from amphetamines to SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Lexapro or Zoloft.
And he explores the biological mechanism here, which is really interesting.
Yeah, because serotonin is often associated with feelings of contentment and satiation. So by artificially keeping serotonin levels high in the brain, Riker argues these drugs chemically sand down the alpha instincts, the biological drive to compete, to conquer, and to build.
It replaces ambition with docility.
Exactly.
He highlights the story of a Texas mechanic named Jake. Jake was going through a messy divorce, and his ex-wife's lawyer actually used his Lexapro prescription as evidence in court to prove he was mentally unstable and unfit for custody.
Which is such a trap.
A total trap. So Jake realizes this, slowly tapers off the SSRIs, and begins testosterone replacement therapy. He starts doing daily ice baths, completely physically transforms himself, and fights back for his life.
And Riker actually interviews a doctor specializing in testosterone replacement therapy to explain what is happening biologically to modern men.
What did the doctor say?
Well, the doctor reveals that his average patient isn't an aging bodybuilder. It's a 25-year-old tech worker or a crypto investor whose estrogen levels are identical to his grandmother's.
Yeah.
And who is suffering from severe erectile dysfunction.
A 25-year-old.
Yeah. Riker posits that while the establishment champions male emotional vulnerability, they are quietly presiding over the chemical castration of the population.
So to combat this, Riker proposes a biological rebellion. He outlines what he calls the Spartan stack.
Right, his daily regimen.
Yeah, it's a daily over-the-counter regimen. 500 milligrams of ashwagandha to lower cortisol and stress hormones, 50 milligrams of zinc to support natural testosterone synthesis, and 20 minutes of unprotected midday sunlight to optimize circadian rhythms and vitamin D.
And he explicitly frames this not as health advice, but as an act of political defiance against a system that profits off men being medicated, docile, and divorced.
Right. Now, if the medical system is sapping physical vitality, Riker argues the digital world is hijacking men's psychological and reproductive drive. Which brings us to his analysis of pornography, the influencer economy, and the beta male crisis.
Yes. He zeroes in on platforms like OnlyFans, analyzing the massive autonomy built around what internet culture calls simps.
Basically, men who spend exorbitant amounts of money on female influencers who offer nothing but parasocial interaction.
Exactly. And he tells the story of Bali Becky, a TikTok creator who posts videos openly bragging about her beta orbiter.
Or beta orbiters.
Yeah, these are 3 different men funding her 12-week vacation in Indonesia. One guy pays her car note back home, another covers the cost of her luxury villa, and a third guy Venmos her $200 just for an emergency coconut water fund.
It is entirely predatory.
Yeah.
But Riker actually explains the psychological mechanism behind why men do it. He calls it the dopamine desert and the beta barter.
Right, like the story of the guy paying $50 for a personalized ASMR audio clip from a stepmom influencer just to hear a woman whisper that she is proud of him.
That is just,
Yeah.
it's incredibly sad. It shows a profound level of isolation.
It really does. Riker explains that modern men are starved for genuine physical connection and societal purpose. So because they are isolated, they engage in this beta barter, trading real-world, hard-earned resources, their labor, their cash, their time for counterfeit digital intimacy.
He actually describes the OnlyFans model as a reverse dowry system.
That's a fascinating way to frame it.
Because historically, a dowry was paid to secure a marriage and family lineage. Today, men are paying portions of their paycheck for the privilege of being ignored by a glowing screen.
And the financial data he pulls to support this is just chilling. He points to leaked OnlyFans analytics showing that 89% of the users spending money are men.
89%.
Yeah. But the most predatory aspect is who the creators are targeting. 78% of the creators on the platform actively optimize their content to target men earning under $35,000 a year.
They are targeting low-wage earners.
Yes. Riker calls this resource extraction signaling. The algorithms and the creators identify the deep loneliness and desperation in low-wage, blue-collar workers, and they monetize that despair. Riker forcefully argues that this is not sexual liberation. It is the most ruthless form of psychological capitalism.
Wow. And it's not just draining their wallets, it is physically altering their biology. What is the scientific context Riker uses to explain the physical toll of this digital consumption?
He focuses on the concept of supernormal stimuli. High-speed internet pornography delivers a dopamine spike so massive that the human brain evolved nowhere near the capacity to handle it.
It just fries the receptors.
Exactly.
Right.
Over time, this downregulates dopamine receptors, meaning everyday tasks like working a job or talking to a real woman feel impossible because they don't provide the same chemical hit.
Right.
Riker cites epidemiological data showing that in porn-saturated nations, average sperm counts have halved since the year 2000. And he also points to medical studies showing that erectile dysfunction has tripled in males under the age of 30 since 2010.
He claims men are literally masturbating themselves into extinction, and he dives into the neurochemistry of post-nut clarity, which I thought was fascinating.
Oh, yeah. He references a study from the journal Hormones and Behavior. When a man achieves climax with a real partner, oxytocin, the hormone responsible for bonding and trust, floods the brain. But the study shows that when men climax to digital porn, oxytocin levels drop by 40%.
Drop by 40%.
Yes. The subconscious animal brain realizes it has been tricked by pixels. There is no mate, there is no offspring, there is just an empty room.
That realization must have a psychological breaking point. Like, if your biology realizes it's constantly being tricked, where does that energy go?
Well, Riker argues it feeds directly into the symptom-to-incel pipeline.
The symptom-incel pipeline.
Yeah. These men pour their emotional and financial resources into a digital void. When the biological reality of their isolation finally hits them, their initial desperation curdles into deep rejection. That rejection ferments into resentment against women in society, and that resentment makes them highly susceptible to radicalization.
Okay, but if their biological drive is completely hijacked by algorithms, how does Riker propose they break out of the loop? Because it sounds like an inescapable, self-reinforcing prison of dopamine depletion.
His solution relies on extreme physical recalibration. He says you cannot think your way out of a dopamine deficit. You have to work your way out.
Through physical labor.
Yes. He gives the example of a men's support group in Idaho. These men sat down and calculated their simp budgets, the hundreds of dollars they were collectively wasting on OnlyFans and adult entertainment every single month.
What did they do with it?
They pooled that capital, bought a plot of land, and started a permaculture farm. They forced themselves to replace passive digital consumption with active physical creation. And today, that farm is actually revenue positive, selling organic produce to their local community.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
He also updates us on Dave, the guy who was blowing $800 a month on OnlyFans while working a soul-crushing data entry job. Dave realizes the trap, quits the porn cold turkey, buys some woodworking tools, and starts building live-edge epoxy river tables in his garage.
And now he's making a killing.
Yeah, now Dave is selling those tables for $5,000 a piece. Riker uses these examples to prove his point. Human evolution rewards men who manipulate the physical world, who build tangible things, not boys who endlessly scroll apps or respawn in video games.
And this emphasis on the tangible, physical world provides the perfect transition to Riker's macro-level analysis, because he argues that the decay we see on the individual level, the isolated man staring at a screen in his bedroom, is exactly mirrored by the decay of the macro institutions run by global elites.
Right, so we zoom way out here to his critique of globalism, climate change policies, and the war on meritocracy. Riker takes direct aim at the World Economic Forum, often referred to as the Great Reset, and Klaus Schwab's infamous projection, "You'll own nothing and be happy."
Which is such a polarizing phrase.
It is, and Riker immediately points out the glaring hypocrisy. Klaus Schwab is telling the global working class to accept a life of renting pods and owning nothing, while Schwab himself reportedly owns 3 luxury Swiss chalets and a private vineyard.
Riker frames this globalist agenda as a form of high-tech neo-feudalism. He looks at the demographics of the young global leaders, figures like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, and notes they average 0.2 children per dynasty. He actually brings in research from Stanford sociologists who analyzed anti-natalist climate activists, people advocating that humans stop having children to save the Earth. The study found that 68% of these high-profile activists inherited their wealth.
Of course they did.
Right. So Riker's argument is that it is incredibly easy to preach carbon austerity, own nothing minimalism, and human extinction when your trust fund is secure, your private jet is fueled, and you live behind armed security.
It's Marie Antoinette telling the peasants to eat lab-grown bugs.
That's exactly it.
But Riker doesn't just critique the hypocrisy. He explains how this elite ideology mechanically destroys everyday logistics. He introduces a concept he calls the toilet paper apocalypse theory, specifically using what he calls the flush test.
The flush test is his historical metric for evaluating the success of central planning. Riker claims that out of 52 Marxist or heavily centrally planned regimes since 1917, 47 of them faced catastrophic hygiene and paper shortages within their first decade in power.
47 out of 52.
Yes. And he explains the economic mechanism behind this. When you destroy the free market's price signals and replace them with ideological mandates, you create what economists call the knowledge problem.
Meaning central planners literally cannot efficiently distribute resources.
Exactly. He points to Venezuela in 2013. The government nationalized the last functioning paper mill, immediately experienced a severe toilet paper shortage, and then went on television to blame bourgeois hoarders for a crisis their own policies created.
Wow.
He also notes the dark irony that Stalin's 5-year plans left Soviet citizens wiping themselves with copies of Pravda, which was the literal state propaganda newspaper.
That is just a dark, dark irony. And he connects those historical supply chain failures directly to modern ESG policies, environmental, social, and governance scoring.
Right, which is huge right now in corporate finance.
Right. For listeners who might not know, ESG is a framework where massive financial institutions and asset managers leverage their capital to force companies to comply with specific ideological and environmental metrics, completely bypassing democratic legislation.
And he uses a very specific example to show the fallout of this.
He tells the story of the Rivertown paper mill in Maine. This mill survived for 3 generations. It survived the Great Depression, but it closed its doors in 2022. Why? Because state lawmakers, driven by ESG metrics, mandated that the mill transition to manufacturing 100% recycled toilet paper by 2025.
And Riker details the impossible paradox this created. The CEO of the mill explained that their machinery could not process the recycled sludge into usable paper without utilizing a specific toxic chemical solvent.
Right.
But that exact solvent had just been banned by the EPA under a different environmental mandate.
So the ESG ideology demanded an outcome that the environmental regulations made physically impossible.
Exactly. The mill shut down, hundreds of working-class men lost their jobs, and an entire town's economy was completely hollowed out.
It's central planners replacing functional market reality with ideological fairy tales, resulting in engineered scarcity. And Riker expands this concept of engineered scarcity to human populations as well. Specifically, in a highly charged chapter about demographic warfare.
Yeah, Raker contrasts two fundamentally different visions of the future here.
Yeah.
First, he looks at Saint-Saint-Denis, a heavily migrant-populated suburb of Paris. He paints a picture of societal breakdown, claiming that police refuse to enter certain sectors at night, crime is rampant, and social cohesion has evaporated. Raker asserts that the establishment media actively suppresses reporting on these areas to protect international migration pacts.
And he couples this with the statistic that New York City spent $4.3 billion managing migrant influxes money. He points out could have paid the annual salaries of 30,000 native public school teachers.
Right, and then he contrasts that urban globalist model with a single Hungarian farmer named Josef.
Yeah, Josef.
Joseph is a guy with dirt under his fingernails and 8 children sitting around his dinner table. Riker explains how Hungary looked at the math of demographic collapse, knowing you need a 2.1 birth rate just to maintain a population, and decided to completely reject mass migration.
And what did they do instead?
Instead, they implemented a policy where native couples receive a $30,000 tax-free grant from the government if they commit to having 3 children.
And Riker notes the outcome of that mechanical incentive, right? Hungary's birth rate boosted by 25% since 2010.
It worked.
He argues that globalist elites push diversity quotas, mass migration, and chemical sterility to erase national borders and create a homogenized, rootless base of compliant consumers.
While in contrast, he argues that nations like Hungary, which actively incentivize native birth rates and traditional families, are the only societies structurally sound enough to survive the coming century.
It's basically the idea that medieval lords needed peasants to farm the land, while modern oligarchs just need interchangeable consumers to buy the products. It's the same power dynamic, just updated for the digital age.
Exactly.
And this ties directly into how these elites manage competition, which Riker explores under the War on Merit. He uses this story he heard on NPR about a man named Igor.
Oh, Igor from Ukraine.
Yeah. Igor is a Ukrainian refugee. He literally fled Russian artillery shells, arrived in Ohio with nothing, and is working 3 grueling physical jobs to feed his family. And how did the NPR segment describe Igor? As a beneficiary of structural whiteness.
It's just wild. And Riker uses Igor to define his concept of competence communism.
Competence communism.
Right. He argues that modern diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI standards are not about fairness at all. They are a psychological tool designed to reframe hard work, grit, and merit as unearned privilege.
Right, because by doing this, the elites can justify their own massive, unearned institutional power while actively punishing the working class people who are striving to succeed.
Riker highlights the absolute insanity of the paradox. You have a war refugee scrubbing floors on his hands and knees, labeled as a privileged oppressor, while a trust fund legacy student at an Ivy League university lectures him about systemic bias. It's maddening. But to illustrate what a society looks like when it actually values merit, Riker dives into the history of Imperial China.
Yeah, he details the Chinese civil service exams, which lasted for 1,300 years, beginning in the Sui dynasty.
And they were brutal, right?
Unbelievably brutal. He explains the grueling mechanics of it. Candidates were locked in isolated cells for days, writing complex 8-legged essays to prevent any possibility of cheating or relying on family connections. It was a ruthless, purely meritocratic filter.
Whoa.
Riker argues that prioritizing pure competence is what allowed China to build the Great Wall and maintain a massive empire. He compares that to today's competence communism, which he says is entirely focused on building HR-safe spaces and redistributing test scores to achieve equal outcomes, much like Soviet breadlines distributing equal but completely inadequate rations.
So we have walked through an incredibly dark, cynical landscape today. Riker has mapped out this massive web of institutional capture covering the courts, the medical establishment, the digital ecosystem, and the global supply chain.
It's a lot. But the book doesn't end on a note of doom, right? He pivots hard in the final chapters, moving from his diagnosis to a very specific prescription. Let's explore his battle plan in the final section: the red pill renaissance and trad masculinity.
Right. Riker firmly believes a massive cultural pushback is already happening just beneath the surface. He interprets the rapid return of young men to tangible trades and physical reality as a direct, conscious rejection of digital compliance and ideological mandates.
And the examples he finds are so interesting. He points to this 27-year-old electrician in Ohio who started a TikTok channel. But instead of doing dances or lip syncing, This guy is posting highly technical videos showing people how to build backyard stone forges and how to repurpose old washing machine motors into coal burners.
And he's getting massive traffic.
He is pulling in 8 million views per video. Riker points out that this single electrician gets more views teaching self-reliance than every gender studies lecture on the platform combined.
He also spotlights Greg Masterson. Masterson was a vice president at Goldman Sachs.
Whoa.
Yeah, he had the corner office, the massive salary, the prestige, but he became completely disillusioned with the corporate ESG mandates and the artificiality of the work. So Masterson walks away from Wall Street entirely and starts the Iron Brotherhood Forge.
A blacksmithing forge.
Yes. Now, he literally has a 2-year wait list of hedge fund managers paying him $15,000 a week to come out and learn how to hand forge Damascus steel knives.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And Riker actually interviews Masterson over a glass of whiskey. And Masterson drops this quote, "Beating swords into plowshares is for beta cucks."
It's a very aggressive statement.
It is aggressive, but it perfectly illustrates Riker's concept of the purpose dividend.
Right. The purpose dividend is Riker's theory that every hour a man spends lifting weights, mastering a physical trade, or laboring with his hands compounds into a type of success that is entirely cancel-proof.
Because an HR department cannot confiscate your physical strength.
Exactly. A Twitter mob cannot cancel your ability to wire a house or grow your own food.
And Riker emphasizes that this rebellion isn't just limited to men. He argues that women are also recognizing the biological mismatch of modern culture and are radically shifting their preferences. He looks at the tradwife movement, where women are actively choosing to return to traditional homemaking.
And he backs this up with data, citing a Pew Research study.
What did the study say?
The study presented women with a hypothetical choice. Would they prefer a woke ally who uses all the correct political terminology, or a traditional guy changing a tire shirtless in a snowstorm?
And the results.
78% of the women chose the guy changing the tire. Riker also highlights a fascinating demographic finding from a New York Times piece. 70% of the women participating in the tradwife online movement actually hold advanced degrees.
Wow. That completely destroys the narrative that traditional wives are just uneducated women who have no other economic options. These women have master's degrees, they have seen the top of the corporate ladder.
Precisely. Riker argues these women are highly strategic. They bought into the corporate feminist promise of having it all, and they realized that mechanically having it all just meant chronic cortisol spikes, adrenal fatigue, SSRI prescriptions, and paying strangers to raise their kids in sterile daycares.
So they're opting out.
Yes. Riker calls their rejection of this the cupcake counter-revolution. These highly educated women are opting out of soul-crushing corporate Zoom meetings about synergy to actually synergize with their biology by raising functional, resilient human beings on a single income.
Okay, but if millions of people are opting out of mainstream corporate and legal structures, where do they go? Because Riker's final chapters detail the construction of what he terms the digital underground railroad.
Right.
He says the key isn't to protest the captured institutions. The key is to build parallel economies that bypass them entirely.
And he points to the infrastructure of this parallel society that's already being built. For instance, he highlights a 40% spike in church attendance, specifically among millennials post-2020.
That's a huge spike.
It is. Riker's analysis is that when you replace transcendent meaning with TikTok algorithms, you create a generation fundamentally starving for something eternal and rooted. He also looks at the massive financial success of alternative media, specifically The Chosen, which is a crowd-funded television series about the life of Jesus.
The numbers on The Chosen are insane. They bypassed Hollywood entirely and raised $40 million directly from regular people who are exhausted by mainstream messaging.
And Riker sees this as a proof of concept. He envisions a future parallel entertainment ecosystem he calls Faithflix.
Faithflix.
Yeah, instead of subverting traditional heroes, this network would feature stories where broken men fight their way back to purpose through hard work and faith. He literally compares it to John Wick, but starting with a Bible verse and ending with community building.
And this parallel structure extends deeply into education too. Riker notes a 65% spike in homeschooling rates. He says parents were looking at public schools teaching gender fluidity, and they are pulling their kids out to teach them fluid dynamics and classical history at the kitchen table.
He even mentions alternative curriculums like PragerU for Tots, which teaches 5-year-olds the mechanics of the Bill of Rights instead of activism.
The underlying logic of all these movements, the forges, the tradwives, the alternative media, the homeschooling, is network effects, right?
Exactly. Riker is arguing that as more competent, capable people exit the mainstream system, They take their resources, their biological vitality, and their capital with them, starving the legacy institutions while building a robust, censorship-resistant parallel economy.
Let's contextualize this final battle plan. Riker isn't telling his readers to make angry YouTube videos complaining about the system. He isn't telling them to hold up protest signs outside of family courts or school board meetings. He is telling them to abandon the architecture entirely.
Just walk away.
Right.
Yeah.
It is like walking into a massive glittering casino and realizing that every single roulette reel is rigged, the dealers are all marking the cards, and the house edge is mathematically set to 100%. If you realize that, you don't stand in the lobby screaming at the pit boss.
No, you just turn around.
You walk out the front doors, walk into the desert, and build your own bank from scratch using raw materials.
That is the exact psychological shift he is demanding from his readers. Do not engage in a war of attrition with an HR department. Learn a trade and become an entrepreneur. Do not fight a school board over curriculum. Build a homeschooling co-op. Do not argue with the legacy media. Build your own distribution networks.
This brings us to the conclusion of our deep dive today. To summarize, the sheer scope of Red Pill Gospel is massive. We've covered a century of Soviet history, the evolutionary psychology of modern dating algorithms, the biochemical fallout of pornography, and the macroeconomics of global supply chains.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. Conrad Riker has authored what he explicitly designed to be a war manual for men who want to reclaim their autonomy, their physical vitality, and their societal purpose from institutions that he believes are fundamentally, intentionally hostile to their existence.
It is an uncompromising, aggressive vision of the modern world. It relies on a deeply cynical interpretation of modern power dynamics, heavily supported by evolutionary psychology and hard biological determinism.
If you're listening to this and you want to understand the architecture of these arguments in their full, unfiltered, and highly provocative context, you absolutely must check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play books to buy Red Pill Gospel by Conrad Riker. We've honestly only scratched the surface of his research today.
Yeah, there's a lot more in the book.
Also, be sure to follow @Conrad Riker on Substack to read his ongoing cultural analysis. And please remember to like and subscribe to this show so we can continue bringing you these extensive deep dives into the books shaping our cultural landscape.
As we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Riker points out a recurring theme throughout all of human history. Every single time an ideology attempts to completely overwrite human biology and natural evolutionary hierarchy, whether it was Soviet agricultural mandates or modern social engineering, it eventually collapses under the sheer weight of its own internal contradictions. Biology, he argues, always bats last.
If you look at it through that lens, the question isn't whether the current cultural operating system will last forever. History strongly suggests it won't. The real question is, when the diagnostic X-ray finally shatters and the dust settles on the cultural landscape, will you be the one holding the hammer, forging something new, or will you be the one waiting for a state-sponsored instruction manual?